Hi, everybody, and thank you again for joining us for another episode of Ukraine Voices from Within. Today, we have a very special guest on our podcast that I met him by accident by cutting the line for food. And then I got to hear his story and heard the American accent and asked him, like, what are you doing here and why are you supporting Ukraine? And then I was amazed by his story. But first of all, before we jumped into getting to know a little bit more about our guest and his story. Maxym, how are you? And how's Ukraine? How's Kiev?
Hello. Hello. I'm relatively fine, and things here in Ukraine, of course, are still revolving around the topic of the imminent counteroffensive of Ukraine, of what's going to happen in the next weeks and month, because it is going to be either a game changer or a deal breaker. It's going to be one of the two. And against that backdrop, the last couple of days across the country, but also specifically here in Kiev, have been quite hectic because for the last couple of days, Russia has been every day launching air attacks on the capital. There has already been an air attack here today. I was walking from my store home and hearing like from different sides of the road there where the air defense system's working. So it is kind of a very very much pressure, I would say, the last couple of days because Russians are trying basically to intervene with the counteroffensive.
Yeah, I saw multiple footages from
Mhm.
Ukraine shooting down some drones that were above the capital, and that was very, very interesting, empowering. So
By
glory
the
to the
way,
heroes.
an interesting detail here is that yesterday one of the missiles that were that were launched in Kiev was ballistic, and I think it was one of the first times, if not the first time, that it was shut down. And this is why I'm mentioning this: is that the Patriot system that was deployed in Ukraine by the US was the first one that could do this here in Ukraine because we had never previously had anything like that. So it is. I take this opportunity to thank to the people of America also for providing those to us.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, US military, US government, for sending us the aid that we need to fight for freedom and democracy. Again, not only for Ukraine, but for the entire world. And we're going to keep saying it to you over and over and over again in our episode because the span of attention right now towards Ukraine is not that high. So we want to once again bring back the stories. There's still people that fighting on the ground every day for their life and also for the freedom for their country, and also international people that coming and fighting with us on those values. And this episode we decided to record it also with video, so you can find this episode on your favorite podcast app or also on YouTube. So you can see our faces as well. And you can read the name of our guest today, although he didn't put his last name. So that's great. So I didn't reveal that. Maybe some people recognize you, maybe they do not recognize you. But again, after cutting him in line to get some dinner in a summit that we both participated in DC, it was a summit for Ukraine. I heard, like, again, very thick American accent, and I'm like, who are you and what are you doing here? I'm Ukrainian. I have a bias, so that's why I'm here in a pro-Ukrainian summit. But why you came all the way from this? Although, like, you have an okay, you don't really have a southern accent if you're not pulling it. And then we started a very interesting conversation that's still going about his experience in Ukraine. So today we have with us Alexander Drueke, that he's calling us all the way from Alabama. So Alex, I'm not going to share a lot about you. I'm just going to, the floor is yours. So tell us a little bit, who are you and what's your story and why you're here and why you connected to Ukraine? Same
Yep,
thing that
yep.
I asked you during the conference, during the dinner.
Right. Well, thanks, Anna, for having me on, and Maxime. I have a feeling that a lot of listeners may be familiar with my name and my story, but for those that aren't, I'm a U.S. military veteran. I served in the Army Reserve for 12 years, and I did 2 tours in Iraq. I got out as a staff sergeant and a platoon sergeant. So when I saw the invasion happen on February 24th, and I realized how much support was about to go over to Ukraine from NATO countries. I said, I've got knowledge, I've got experience, I've got skills to teach them how to use these weapon systems, to teach them how to do Western doctrine. I love training soldiers. Being a platoon sergeant was one of my favorite things to do in the Army. So I really felt like I had a lot of things to offer Ukraine. And as Omni pointed out, this is not just a fight for Ukraine. It's a fight for freedom. It's a fight for democracy. It's a fight for sovereignty. It's a fight for everything that is good and just in this world. And so it wasn't even a choice to go. I felt compelled to go. I had to go. So I had to get a little bit of gear before I was fully combat ready. Because I want to stress to people. I went over as a private citizen. I paid my own way. I bought my own equipment. The U.S. government had nothing to do with it, and that's important when we start talking about some Russians later on. So I showed up in Ukraine just almost exactly 6 weeks after the invasion. I ended up joining the International Legion. Served and trained with them for a while, and then a small group of us broke off from that, and we went all over the country, working directly with Ukrainian units, from national police to territorial defense to Ukrainian army, just kind of training them on NATO weapons and NATO doctrine.
I have a question before you continue. How different it was, because you were a commander in the military in the U.S. and then coming to Ukraine, training different foreign language as well. How was it? What was different? What was the same? What you learned from them that you taken with you to civilian life today?
It was really interesting. I mean, usually we would make a contact that spoke really good English, and they'd be a translator for us as necessary. And then there's also always Google Translate. We use that a lot. But it was interesting to see, especially with so many foreign volunteers from all over the world. I mean, we had guys from Germany, Luxembourg, Canada, Britain, Morocco, Sweden, Brazil, Mexico. I mean, just all over the world. And some of them didn't even really speak English. We had one unit that was one platoon that was French and Spanish speakers, and so we had to, if the battalion commander came out, he spoke in Ukrainian, which was translated into English, which was then translated into French, which was then translated into Spanish. And so the meetings with that battalion commander, they were really long. We did not like those meetings because it just took so long to say everything. It had to be translated. So that was kind of cool. It was really interesting, and there was a mix of guys from ones like me who had deployments to Iraq or Afghanistan, to guys, some of the South Americans, they had experience fighting drug cartels, and then some other guys, they had no military experience at all. And so we were working with all kinds of skill levels there in the Legion, and that made it challenging, but it made it interesting.
I have another question about that before. So many, people from all over the world saying like, oh, some of them have like a higher combat experience or military experience, some of them do not, and they all come together speaking multiple language. It's like, I don't know, multi-pot of everything and everything. What do you think is kind of like the common ground of everybody to be there? What sticks everybody together in that? And I don't know if that was your why to go, but I wonder what is the common ground for everybody.
Sure. I mean, that early on, it was really kind of a Wild West situation, and we honestly, there were some guys there that really did not need to be there. But we got pretty good at identifying them and finding ways to get them where they wouldn't cause any trouble, or hopefully get them all the way back home because they didn't need to be there. But the ones that did need to be there, I think really the overall idea was that this was the right thing to do. It doesn't, even some of these guys with no combat experience at all, no military experience at all, they would still say, I can't sit idly by and watch this happen. I have to do something. And so, a lot of us, just like me, I just showed up, and they said, why are you here? And I said, well, I'm here to help. And whatever capacity that means, whatever Ukraine wants me to do, if it's training, if it's fighting, if it's shoveling shit, if it's, serving food at the chow hall, I don't care. I'm here to help. And I think that's how most of us felt, the ones that were there for the right reasons. And then of course, when we broke off and we started training Ukrainians, that was really interesting because, I mean, some of these guys, they've been fighting since 2014, so they've got combat experience. Some of them have a lot more combat experience than me. But they didn't know the NATO weapons, they didn't know NATO tactics and NATO doctrine, which, if you're talking about using an M4 rifle, that's not a big deal. But when you start involving Patriot battery systems and things like that, you have to understand the tactics and the doctrine. And that unfortunately, there's a lot of holdover from the Soviet era still within the Ukrainian military, and they're having to make that shift to more Western doctrine. And so, I mean, that's what we were trying to do while we were going there. Then we'd gone over on just visitor visas, and we were about to run out on our visas because all these Ukrainian units were saying, like, we want you here, we want you to train us, but our commander won't let us do any official paperwork on you. But we said, hey, we want to stay here because we want to keep helping. So we made contact with one of our previous guys who said, hey, I just had a couple spots open up in my unit. We can take you and we can get you paperwork. So we're like, okay, cool. So we were in Mykolaiv at the time. We went to we took a bus over to Odessa, then a night train up to Kyiv because we had to sign paperwork in Kyiv, and then we took another night train over to Kharkiv where the unit was operating. It turned out that they were what they term a special forces unit. It was a drone reconnaissance unit, very, very small. There were 10 of us all together. We got settled in and had our mission brief that evening, and then we went out on a mission with them that next morning. And our team of 8 discovered that we had landed right inside an entire mechanized battalion of Russian forces, so tanks, BMPs, a few hundred troops. And so obviously our plans didn't go as we intended. The group got split up, and then Andy and I, who's also from Alabama, he lives about 2 hours away from me, but we didn't know each other until we met in the Legion. We were trying to make our way back to base. We spent about 8 hours going through the thick woods, avoiding trip wires and drones and artillery and mortars and Russian patrols. And we're not really getting into the details of the capture because we don't want to hurt any of the ongoing operations. But I can say that it was a platoon-sized element. It was probably about 20 guys that managed to get us into a pincher movement, and we had no choice but to lay down our arms. And then we start getting into captivity. Do you have any questions or anything before we start moving on to that?
I just want to make a comment like, oh my God, bureaucracy is getting like, in the way of also the war. Like, oh, you don't have the papers. I'm sorry, man. You cannot, you have to stop. Turn around, just go.
Well, it was really important to us to be involved with paperwork and with sanctioned government organizations and units, because there are some guys over there who were basically acting like mercenaries, and they don't have any paperwork and they're not doing official things. And so, it was exceptionally important to us. We were on the side of right and in the good favor of the Ukrainian government.
Yeah, and also for all the hunters out there that hunting in America and the US, you cannot just go to Ukraine and start shooting the Russians. It doesn't work this way.
Yeah,
you do have to have the right paperwork to do that. This is not a Wild Wild West. Like, there's rules in a war as well. So please don't ask me how you can get to Ukraine and to get you like some permits to do that. It's not working this way.
And I would like to point out, when I went, it was the Wild Wild West, but they have really started tightening up on things. They're being much more careful who they let in. They're doing a lot better on their vetting process. So, guys that just want to go over there and start shooting people, they're not going to make it anyway. So don't bother if that's why you're going. Yeah,
it's not a video game; it's a real life.
Yeah, there were quite a few Call of Duty warriors were there, as we like.
Oh my God! Oh my God! They were cutting. Yeah, Max, you were about to ask something.
No, I just wanted to say that my comment before Alex would go further was that knowing what part of his story he's going to share henceforth, about the captivity and everything, and looking at him right now, it is kind of hard to process. And for me, being Ukrainian, it is kind of hard to process that there is this entire story behind this man I'm seeing on the screen. It really, it's so much. It's so a lot to take in, and to still see a person sitting still, sorry, before me here, being calm after everything he'd go through. And I just cannot hold back my admiration at that. That was my only comment so far. But just for our listeners out there, the majority, the biggest chunk of the story is, from what I can gather, is still to be told. So please.
Yeah, this is where it gets fun. So we were captured by Russian forces. I want to stress that, because during our captivity, while they were forcing us to do propaganda videos and things like that. They wanted us to say that it was DPR, Donetsk People's Republic personnel that had captured us and were holding us. But I know the difference between a DPR uniform and a Russian uniform. The Russians captured us, and the Russians were running the show. Even when we were, being held or interacted with DPR personnel, it was still the Russians calling the shots. It was still MGB and FSB that was coming in and telling them what they needed to do. So when we got captured, we were held for about 24 hours there in the soldiers' little outpost. And honestly, besides being put on our knees and blindfolded, guns put to our head, several times. There were several times we really thought we were going to be executed. A lot of the higher-ranking officers really, really wanted us dead. But what we assumed was the platoon leader. He kind of stepped in and said, "Hey, these guys are valuable assets. Like, you don't want to kill them. We can get something for these guys." So I honestly think he saved our lives. And then just your regular soldiers, it was soldiers treating soldiers like soldiers. And I think they most of them could look at it and go, if it was reversed, yeah, I'd want some water, or yeah, I'd want a cigarette. The few of them that spoke broken English, they were very, very curious about America. Things like Biden, good, Obama, good. My favorite one, a guy goes, American women, good. And I was like, oh, I see. Okay, I know what that gesture is. Yeah. So, there was a lot of war crimes committed on us there. They looted us. They forced us to dig fighting positions. They did act like they were going to execute us. I was butt stroked in the head with a AK-47. Got shot between my legs because I didn't speak Russian. There was some bad stuff there, but overall, it was the best treatment we received the entire time. So after that night there, and the next afternoon, they took us into Russia. We know we crossed the border. They took us to what appeared to be kind of a semi-permanent POW camp. And one of the guys, when we were the first night there, we were forced to stay up all night long, standing in one position. And one guy just came up to us individually, because at this point, Andy and I had been separated. He came up to us and as hard as he could, punched us in the gut and said, "Welcome to Russia." So we were pretty sure we were in Russia. And then we spent a week there of just very intense interrogation and torture. We had gone out without any kind of paperwork. We didn't have passports, phones, identification, anything on us, because we didn't want to be easily identified. But that meant that we had to prove who we were. And they really, really, really wanted us to say that we were CIA, that the U.S. government had sent us, that the U.S. government was directly involved, that because I was in the chemical corps in the army, I've been going all around Ukraine and teaching people how to make biological weapons, all of these crazy, crazy lies. And they were trying to beat the lies into us so that, we would say them. But it was a really challenging mix. In the U.S. military, we're kind of taught in those kind of situations, if you're a POW, that you resist. Just everything you do, resist. Don't give them anything. And I'm here to tell you that doesn't work. We found that out real quick. The secret is give them little small things, and then you can hide a lot of the big things. But you've got to give them something. You've got to give them half truths, or you got to give them some small details, but not the real important details. Because sometimes they'd fact check us and verify. So we had to be really, really careful. Then we assume the reason for it was probably they moved us to a black site somewhere in Donetsk, and there it was mainly DPR personnel that we were interacting with every day, but the Russians were still running the show. And we think it's so that Russia could say to the U.S., we don't have them. The DPR has them. And so if you want to back, you have to recognize DPR as a state. And obviously America's not going to do that. But we think that was probably their reasoning for doing it. Also, they were putting us through the kangaroo court process to give us the death penalty. Like right before we got captured, there were two British guys and a Moroccan that were sentenced to the death penalty. And so, even my lawyer that had been appointed to me said, we are going to give you the death penalty. We are going to kill you. So, I was pretty sure I was going to die. And then that we spent a month there at that black site. I was in solitary confinement the entire time, and it was regular beatings for no reason. they cracked 4 of my ribs. And they really got into the interrogation and torture there. They hooked me up to a car battery 4 times and electrocuted me. That was probably the worst torture. You know, I was eating, I was living on a diet of just a tiny loaf of bread that I got once a day, and I never knew when during the day I was going to get it. And then we had water with stuff floating in it. I still don't know what it was. So I mean, that was a pretty rough month. And then they finally moved us to what we believe is a former Ukrainian isolation prison in the Donetsk region, where we were finally in a cell with, it was 3 guys to a cell. So, you know, I wasn't in solitary anymore. I had a window, so I could tell what time of day it was. That was nice. Um, and that remind me to talk about telling time there at the black site. But they moved us into this isolation prison where we spent 23 hours a day in that cell. We ate there, we used the bathroom there, we slept there, we did everything there. And then one hour in the afternoon, they would take us out for what we call the walk, and they would take everybody in your inside cell and put you in an outside cell. But it meant that we could shout over the walls to the other English speakers, the guys who'd gotten the death penalty, some of the Azov guys. There were 9 English speakers altogether, and so that 1 hour a day gave us a chance to get to know each other and to talk and to commiserate and laugh. And you know, it was nice to not be in solitary. At the black site, I think they intended it to be a form of torture, but they would blare heavy metal music from wake up time to bedtime. And the problem was, like, it was music that I listened to in high school. It was songs that I loved, or bands. I was like, oh, I didn't even know they had that song, you know? So I really enjoyed the music. And then it was the only way I could keep track of time. I didn't have a window. The light on my cell stayed on 24/7, but I could count songs. I figured, you know, your average song is somewhere around 3 to 4 minutes. So I count songs and I could figure out, you know, if it's been an hour, 8 hours, or, you know, whatever it was. But then about halfway through, they stopped playing the music, and that was incredibly worse because I had no way to mark the time. I don't know if it was 3 minutes or 30 minutes or 3 hours, and I was left with absolutely nothing besides my own thoughts. Well, and then, like, I interacted with the ants and the flies in my cell. I gave them names based on their characteristics. We made deals about, hey, if you get this close to my bread, I have to kill you, but other than that, I'm not going to kill you. You know, some pretty weird stuff. So I recommend, if you think you might ever find yourself in a similar situation, have a lot of interest, have a lot of hobbies. You know, I replayed movies in my head, I replayed video games in my head. I've done construction and carpentry in the past, and so I've built houses in my head, like brick by brick, board by board, nail by nail, adjusted the layout. You know, I mean, anything I could do to keep my mind active was really important. Later on when we were in the prison, we've been there so long, and at that point we weren't being beaten when we were in the prison. It was still a huge amount of human rights violations, water shortages, and even when we did have water, it was dirty water. A horrible diet of basically just oatmeal and moldy bread, and animal parts, not like the stuff you want to eat, and not even like the good organs, just all the organs. But we weren't being beat, so that was nice. But it meant we weren't being pulled out of the cell to be beat, and so there was a lot of boredom. And Andy and I we used the word mush a lot. We felt like our brains were turning into mush because we had just, like, I'd lost the ability to daydream. I'd done so much daydreaming that I just run out, and you know, we were essentially on death row, and had no idea when they were going to kill us, how they were going to kill us, but we were pretty sure they were going to kill us. So, you know, it was really hard to maintain hope in that situation. But because of that, we created a rule in the cell that we call the 51-49 rule. And that was, no matter what's going on, no matter how depressed you are, how hopeless you are, how much you're missing home, whatever it is, you have to stay 51% positive. Even if you're 49% negative, stay on that positive side. And if you ever drop down below 51, you had to let the other guys know. And it didn't matter where we were on the scale, we had to step it up and get you back on that positive side. Because, you know, keeping hope alive is tough, but it's what you have to do. And we found really the best way to do that was humor. You know, there's dark humor, there's graveyard humor, but then there's what we were doing, and man, it was something else. But you know, that we could make ourselves laugh over the stupidest things. We played 20 questions endlessly. We came up with, like, what's the least effective superpower you can have? It's still a superpower, but it really doesn't do anything. I mean, what if superheroes were different insects? What would their characteristics be? And our favorite was Daddy Longlegs, man, and he's so long and he's built like a Daddy Longlegs. And he was having to find his counterbalance, but he was going to save us once he found his counterbalance. Um, we would do horrible celebrity impressions, and I mean, just anything we could do to keep humor there and keep our mood up, and we giggled like little schoolgirls about stuff. But that humor was a lifesaver in that situation. It was that was the best thing about being not in solitary confinement anymore. I could interact with people and laugh. But it was a tough situation to be in for sure. Then finally we didn't know what was happening. They took all the English speakers and they put us in a large holding cell there at the prison, and it was the first time that we'd gotten to like shake hands and hug and sometimes see each other's faces, and so it was really cool. And we were in there for a few hours, and we asked the guards for some cigarettes, and they just started passing out cigarettes, and we're like, this is not good. They're being very, very generous with these cigarettes. We're pretty sure they're going to kill us. So then finally they took us out of that cell. They put plastic bags on our heads, which anytime we were moved anywhere.
Wait. Before we jumping into that part of the story, I have a few questions.
Sure.
When you realize you're in Ukraine, the mission goes wrong, you and Andy in the village, you hit the Russians, what goes in your head? What are the feelings that you're having that you realize, oh, damn?
Well, when the team first got separated, Andy and I managed to find just a little shell scrape, a little hole that we could get in and hide from the T-72 shooting at us, and we got in that little hole, and he turned to me and he said, "I've decided I want to live." And so, in my head, I said, okay, my mission in life from this point on is to keep Andy alive. That's all I have to do. And so when we got surrounded, I was ready to go out in a blaze of glory, just kind of take whoever I could with me. I knew I was going to die, but then I turned and I looked at Andy and I said, that means Andy's dead. So, that's the only reason I laid on my arm. But then from that point on, it was kind of like, oh, fuck. And it was surreal. It was like being in a movie, stuff that I thought didn't happen in the real world. It only happened in movies. No, it was happening to me. So it was really intense. Um, you know, I I've been in combat before. I've had deployments to Iraq. I come from a military family, and so when I was like 22 on my first deployment, I made peace with death. Not that I had a death wish, not that I wanted to die, but I made absolute peace with death because I realized it was a very real possibility. And so, I spent most of the time, if they put a gun to my head, I would say my goodbyes in my head and just wait. Um, and then it was, the things that we were taught in the military is like the more you get moved, the longer you're in captivity, the harder it's going to be to escape. And so every step of the way, even though Andy and I were separated, we were both looking around and going, okay, well, if we could escape, what would we do? How would we do it? And so, that was a big focus, and it was a really big focus on how can I give them information without giving them information? Yeah. It was like a mental chess game. In some ways, it was fun. I like a challenge. And, during a lot of the interrogations with the MGB and the FSB, I felt like we were playing chess and they had a full set of pieces and I had one pawn on the board. So, a lot of times my pawn got hurt, but sometimes my pawn did some real damage. And I think they had a respect for their enemy. I think they enjoyed playing that game as well. Anytime that I won, they'd have some extra words with the guards on the way out, and I could get some extra loving on the way back to my cell. But sometimes you take your beatings. Sometimes it's worth it. And I think I can say that I came out of this situation with my honor intact, and I think that's really important. I know some guys related to this story, they don't have their honor in, and they've got to live the rest of their lives. So, yeah.
One of the things that you share with me is that when they took everything from you, your identity, your cards, everything, you felt that somebody takes the freedom from you and takes everything from you. Like you've been stripped down all the way. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we had gone up strip. They didn't take any identification with us from us, but they took all of our gear. They looted our gear, which is a war crime. Um, but then I've always been a proponent of the rights that we have in America. I think we have uh, a unique system in the world that we really have a lot of freedom. We have a lot of privilege, and I used to try and get people to understand that and appreciate it. But it wasn't until I was in Russian captivity and I had absolutely every single human right stripped away from me, every single one, that I really realized how privileged we are in the West and particularly in America to have rights. And we really, really we need to appreciate them and not take them for granted, not get a sense of. I think the word you and I kept using was privilege. Everyone here feels so privileged, and they're taking their rights for granted because they have them. And I'm telling you, they're important. It's good to have them. Yeah.
And they can be taken away from you in a snap. So appreciate it as long as you can. Do you think that those are kind of like the lessons that you learn from being in captivity or from the time you spend in your deployment or both or neither?
Yeah, I mean, I think it sounds really weird to say it, but overall through this experience, I feel like I've come out for the better. I have a lot more confidence in myself. A lot of my combat PTSD symptoms from Iraq, they really don't matter anymore compared to what I've been through. I've got a whole new set of PTSD things. But I honestly, I feel like I'm better equipped to handle my own PTSD. And Andy, he was in the Marine Corps, but he never deployed. This was his first combat experience, and it's his first experience with PTSD, and it's a doozy. So, thankfully, I'd already been in the VA system for a while. I've been getting counseling and stuff like that. When we were in the prison, I could sit down with him and I'd say, "Hey, man, like, here's some of the things you're feeling. Here's why you're feeling them. Here's what you can do about it. But more importantly, when we get out of here, we kind of switch back and forth between if we get out and when we get out. But I try to say, when we get out of here and you're back home with your family, here's what you need to tell them because you're going to have some bad days, you're going to have some bad moments, and in those moments, you're not going to be able to express yourself and say what's going on and say why you're being an asshole. So on the good days when you and your fiance are having a picnic in the park and it's a beautiful day and everything's perfect, you need to go turn around and say, hey, I love you and I'm really enjoying this time, but it's not always going to be like this. Here's some things that may happen. Here's some things that I might feel, and I want you to know that I still love you, and here's what you can do about it. Because that's the time you can talk about those things. So I think anyone can do that in their life. It doesn't take trauma to be able to just tell your loved ones that you love them when you're having a good time.
Yeah. And a minute back, we stopped at the stage of your story when you told us that one day they put the uh, essentially bags on your heads and were taking you somewhere. So, what kind of a day was that, and what happened next?
That that's what we call the freedom ride, and we really need to come up with another name for it because that makes it sound positive. But they put the plastic bags on our heads. They tightly wrapped our hands with packing tape, and then wrapped the packing tape around the bag around our eyes really really tight. And duct tape has a little bit of give to it. Packing tape does not. And so then they piled us in the back of a military truck. They locked us together in stress positions where we're sitting on top of each other. Nobody can breathe. Everybody's really hurting, and we spent about 24 hours in that position. They did at one point break us into a smaller group where the 9 English speakers got put in what we think was a van. It felt like a van, but we couldn't see anything. But they put us back in that same stress position, and that 24 hours was the worst part of the entire ordeal. It's the only time that I mean, there were countless times we thought we were going to die. We figured we were going to die. We probably were seconds away from death, but that was the only time that a lot of us actually prayed for death. We asked for death. Andy said that even if he had known it was a release, because we didn't know if it was a prisoner swap, we didn't know if it was we were just moving to a different prison. We didn't know if it was a mass execution. They weren't telling us anything. But he said even if he had known it was a release, he still would have prayed for death because it hurt that much. I still have nerve damage in my hands and scarring on my face from that. Um, so it was pretty terrible. But they finally got us to a small international airport in Russia, we think, that would have been shut down just for us. And then they cut the bags off our heads, and there were Middle Easterners there, medical personnel, and they start kind of doing checks on us one by one, and we're like, do you really need to see if I've got high blood pressure before you shoot me in the face? Like, what's the point here? But having spent some time in the Middle East, I looked at the paperwork and I was like, I think this is Saudi Arabia personnel. And it turned out that it was. They finally took us out on a little tram system, and we saw a big Saudi airplane sitting on there, and we said, well, that's not real. They're not gonna put us on that plane. And then they put us on the plane. And we said, well, they're obviously just going to shoot us out of the sky. That's the easiest way to get rid of us. There's no way they're letting us go. But the Saudi personnel on the plane, they said, hey, you're safe. You're being released. We're going to take care of you. We're taking you to Riyadh. And they had duffel bags for us with fresh clothes and some hygiene stuff, because we were wearing secondhand. We look like homeless people. We were wearing dirty clothes that had come second or third hand from Russian separatists. We hadn't showered in 2 months. It was bad. So, they really took good care of us. They gave us food, they gave us cigarettes, they gave us water. It was the nicest plane I'll ever be on in my life. It was really cool. And then we landed in Riyadh, and it wasn't until we actually shook the hand of our embassy representative there, and she said, you're free. Here's my phone. Would you like to call your families? And we're like, we might be getting released. That was the first time we were really like, yeah, okay, this might be working. We thought maybe they were just going to fly the plane around for a while and then land it somewhere in Siberia and we disappear. So yeah, then the Saudis there, they were great. They took us straight to the hospital. Well, I'll back up. When she said, do you want to call your family? And I said, yes. And so I called, and well, she called and introduced herself to my mother, and then handed the phone to me. And my mom goes, why are you in Saudi Arabia? And I said, well, I'm free. She said, you're what? I'm free. Free? Like she said that she didn't even know what the word meant, at that point. It was weird. But then I was like, hey, Andy needs to call his fiance. I'll be in touch soon. So they rushed all of us off to a hospital there. They took care of all of our medical needs as best they could. They weren't really told why we were there. So I'd had a really bad reaction to the packing tape on my face. My fluid had built up in my face, and then it started draining down. So by the time I was in the hospital, it had swelled my eyes completely shut. I was effectively blind, in a very tense situation. But the doctors were like, well, what happened to your face? And so, well, they put a plastic bag on my head and really tightly wrapped packing tape around it. And they're like, oh, okay, well, when did you discover you were allergic to plastic? I'm like, I'm not allergic to plastic, guys. Here's what happened. Well, no, okay, so you were allergic to the tape? Was it the adhesive? Like they couldn't process the fact that what I'd gone through. And one of the nurses was like, hey, is there anything you need to talk to the doctors about? And said, well, I'd like to get my heart checked out because they electrocuted me with a car battery. And she just let that one slide. They never checked that out at all. I think they thought I was just like some delirious person. They're like, this isn't real. What is up with this guy? So yeah, but some of them did know what was going on, and they took really good care of us. And then we got taken to a safe house for a night, and then our families paid for us to come back home. We had gone as private citizens, and so they wanted us to come back as private citizens. The government had offered to assist, and they said, no, we want to make it clear that there's no U.S. government involvement in this situation. Yeah, and then we got home.
Wow, what a story. It's so much to wrap one's head around. And once again, I cannot really believe that this is not just, a subject of a movie or something, but, a storyline of a person I'm talking to on Zoom right now. That indeed is impressive. But let me ask you this about the takeaways, if it can be concluded as that, from the entire experience, because now that you've had this experience in your life, you essentially are a conductor of so many important conclusions about Russia, about the war in Ukraine, about Ukraine itself, about the entirety of things around what's going on for the past year and more here. So the question is that in one of your interviews, you responded to all of those who are skeptical of presenting Russia as a total villain, who are trying to see some gray area around it. So you said my answer to them is come and talk to me. I'm a living proof of the terrible things that they do to people. And I can tell you that this is for real. Everything that's happening and what they're talking about in the media elsewhere is for real. And there is indeed much wishful thinking about Russia because it's politically needed, to keep talking to them. They're an important subject in the international arena, et cetera, et cetera. And so what can you tell them, these people, to all of those who still have this rose-colored glasses about the necessity to do so, to break that kind of vision and to see the facts for what they are, and what conclusions need to be drawn by the Americans, by the Westerners, by the entire world about how Russia should be treated in response.
Yeah, that's a lot of things to cover. I'm going to try and make sure that I hit all of them. I wonder what you were saying. It's kind of, you feel a little surreal sitting here and talking with me. I go through the same thing. I'll be driving around doing regular errands, going to get my hair cut, something like that, and all of a sudden I'll go, "Did that actually happen? Was I really a POW, or was that just a bad dream?" Like sometimes it doesn't feel real, but then anytime I see a POW flag flying around here, I'm like, I'm part of that now, and that's a really really weird. It's a weird feeling. But there are a lot of lessons to be taken from this. I'm still trying to process all the lessons that I've learned. I think some of the key words that I keep coming back to are resilience, humor, and gratitude. I think those are things that kept me alive, and they're things that I have a much greater appreciation for now. Like I said, all in all, health and mental issues aside, I feel better. I feel like a better person coming through this experience, and I realize that it gives me a platform. I never wanted to be famous, but I have a platform now, and I want to make sure that I do good things with it. I legitimately have a second chance on life. Um, I ran out of all 27 of my cat lives, but I legitimately have a chance on life, and I'm trying to do everything positive I can with it. Of course, obviously, my main focus is Ukraine because, like you said, Russia is guilty of war crimes. They're guilty of human rights violations. I am living proof. If you don't believe it, come talk to me. Just listening to this podcast, you're going to know those are legitimate war crimes, from the very small to the very big. The Russian forces are brutal. They are murderers. They are intentionally targeting civilian infrastructure. They would stage their artillery pieces right outside our prison, so that if Ukraine tried to fire back on these artillery pieces that were actively firing on them, then the Russians could videotape and go, see, they're bombing a residential area. The Ukrainians are trying to kill civilians. But, well, no, you already killed all the civilians there, and you put your arty pieces there. So I mean, yeah, the Russians are doing horrible things, and we really need to end this war. Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, they are outstanding. I've fallen in love with the country. I've fallen in love with the people. They are incredibly fierce. They're incredibly determined. They're also incredibly generous and kind and humorous, even with the horrors they're facing on a daily basis. And I promise you that Ukraine is going to win this war as long as they have the supplies to do it. Right now, they are vastly outnumbered and they're vastly out equipped. Putin's pulling out tanks from the 1960s and grabbing bodies from prisons, but it's still more tanks and more bodies than Ukraine has. And I think Putin is hoping to just fight a war of attrition to where there's no Ukrainians left, and he doesn't care how many Russians he loses in the process, but he wants to wipe Ukraine off the face of the earth. And we can't allow that to happen. Right now, Ukraine is the shining beacon of freedom and democracy. They are going to win this war, but we have to keep supplying them. And so far it's been kind of a too little, too late situation where they say, well, we really need tanks. And we say, well, we're not going to give you tanks. And then 3-4 months later, we say, okay, we'll give you tanks. But you know what? They needed them 3-4 months ago. Now it's too late. So if I realize war fatigue is a thing, I experienced that among civilians when I was doing my tours in Iraq. Like war is tiring for sure. And I know a lot of people in America and probably around the world are tired of their governments sending a lot of money and sending a lot of military equipment when these countries are saying, but yeah, we have our own economic issues, or we need to make sure that we provide for our own defense. And so, they have problems with that equipment going to Ukraine. And I have the answer for that. The answer is to send it now. Send exactly what they need, send everything they need, send it now, and Ukraine will win this war and they'll end it. And then we won't have to be sending things 6 months, 12 months, 24 months from now, because the war will have ended and Ukraine will be victorious.
And I think on top of that, like all the problems that we have right now in the world and prices are increasing, the reason for that is the war. Once we're going to stop the war, things will go back to the new normal that we're going to create. But it's a huge war, no matter where, it's impacting everybody. So a lot of people think like, oh, I'm far away. I'm like, no, the US, Australia, whatever country you're at, you're not isolated. We're all part of a big global world that we all connected to one another.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a different question and go back to kind of like when you came back and adapting into the new reality and be around privileged people and kind of like how you dealt with it to come from one world to another and then dealing with other people that cannot never been in such situation or at all. What are the tools that you use?
Well, in a way, I'm lucky that I already had combat PTSD from Iraq. It meant that when I got back from that tour, PTSD was a career ender. Nobody admitted that you had it. We didn't even talk about it. I went about 7 years before I actually admitted I had it and started getting treatment. But that meant I was using a lot of unhealthy coping skills, and I wasn't understanding why I was feeling the way I was feeling. And yeah, I got really, really irritated. In particular, when I came back from the second tour, I got very irritated with people and their first world problems. They'd be like, "Oh, traffic was really long," or they messed up my order at Starbucks. And I'm just like, that doesn't matter. And I would get angry about it. But then I started going through counseling, and I got better. And I think through this recent experience, I actually have a lot more inner peace. I spent a month and a half where if I wasn't being beaten, then I was alone in my own thoughts. And I really had a chance to analyze myself and work through some of my issues and look at I would daydream about if I got released and what I would do. And so it gave me a chance.
Can you share one of those daydreams?
The one that I really kept going back to was I wanted to stock books at a bookstore. Like I would be out in the community, but I'm not customer facing. Like all I have to do is the mystery sections over there, but it's just a simple, mindless task. But I would be doing something and I would be around people. But I wouldn't have to interact with people if I don't want to. Because a month and a half in solitary does funny things to your brain, some good, some bad. But so I was able to look at like, okay, well, what are my strengths? What makes me happy? What if I get out of here? What are the directions I would like my life to go? So I got a lot of chance to work on myself, and it means that I've got some irritability issues still, but they're different, and I don't get angry at the people who are complaining about their first world problems and who are living a privileged lifestyle. If I have the opportunity, I try and talk to them about that. But yeah, I don't get mad about it too often anymore. That's good.
You're going to continue spread the message about the 51-49 rule. And I think that can be a tool that we all can use. Always be 51 optimistic and positive about everything that happened in your life.
I really think so. I recently did a Zoom call with a high school class up in New Hampshire, and it was like, well, why should I care about Ukraine? How does that affect me? And we had a really good discussion. It was really fun. They asked some good questions, and then a couple weeks afterwards, I got a package in the mail that was letters. Every kid had written me a letter, and several of them said that 51-49 rule really inspired me. I'm trying to live my life that way. So yeah, I'm honored that I'm inspired that they were inspired by it. I think it's a really valuable rule, and it's a good way to live your life.
It is. Max,
Yes.
Maxim, sorry.
Yeah. Well, yes.
This I will edit. No.
At this point, I think we have been talking for around an hour, and about all the details of the journey and all the takeaways. What are the final thoughts that you would like to impart to the audience? Because like the last thoughts said anywhere are the ones that usually stick the most. What are the messages that you would like the people to end up listening this podcast with, and to go around their household chores and keep thinking about? What would those final thoughts be?
I think I've touched on all of the major points. I would stress just kind of give a bullet point list. It's resiliency, humor, and gratitude. Appreciating the little things. Try and live by that 51-49 rule. And we have to do absolutely everything we can to end this war and ensure Ukraine's victory. So I know in the U.S., call your representatives. One of the things that got us released was the deluge of calls and emails to our representatives saying something had to be done for us. One of the representatives said in one day he got 14,000 calls just about us, and that's the most he'd ever received on any one issue. So that system in America, it works, and it's your right and your duty to use that system. So contact your representatives and tell them that you want Ukraine to get what it needs now and everything it needs now, so we can end the war now. I'm not entirely sure. I know you've got listeners all over the world, and I'm not entirely sure how all of their governments work. But if you have any ways of contacting your government and demanding these kinds of things, then please do it. This fight is for the entire world. Putin is not going to be satisfied with just Ukraine. He'll take Moldova. He'll take the Baltic states. He'll take Poland, and we don't know whose doorstep he's going to be on next. But he's definitely not going to be satisfied with only Ukraine. So we have to stop this here and stop it now.
Oh, 100%. And again, it's a power shift that we see all over the world, and we have the ability to kind of make sure that the power stays in the right sector, and in democracy and not in autocracy. And it's all of our responsibilities, and it's not only like one people responsibility. It's all people that believe in those values of freedom and democracy. Any final words before we go to conclude?
I don't think so. Thanks for having me on. And I think it was a really good interview. Yeah,
Yeah, it was awesome. It was 100%. And by the way, for all our audience listeners, Alex is a great speaker. So if you want him to speak with your community, class, I don't know, base, something like this, to inspire your people to life, feel free to contact him. It's a life changer. I know that since I met Alex after cutting the line, I was inspired to continue to do a lot of work around Ukraine and not to give up, because it's very easy to give up when the entire world kind of moved on to the next thing. But when you're fighting for something that is right, when you're fighting for something that it's bigger than you just keep going, because we don't want to, in a few years, look back and ask ourselves, did we do enough? Or did I did enough to contribute that everything happened, and like to be on the right side of history? So take those, my last words here, and just like think about them. What do you do to make a difference in the world? What do you do to make a difference towards the victory of Ukraine? Because there is a lot of work ahead of us. Ukraine is still fighting, and we need to fight with them. And as I say all the time, keep Ukraine in your minds, hearts, and actions, and definitely actions. So, Maxym, any final words?
Well, my final idea here would be that I'm very happy and very proud of the fact that the world has an opportunity to learn the story and the conclusions about what's going on around Ukraine from the words not only of Ukrainians, because they, at the end of the day, could be designated interested parties, like support us, please give us, more weapons, etc., but from the words of your own people, of the Westerners, of the Americans who come here, have their own experiences, sometimes very harsh, as in case of Alex, but still, this is one of yours returning to you with his own conclusions and sounding very much the same in his conclusions as the words that we Ukrainians are telling you about what's going on and what we need. And that, well, coincidence, that reverberation that exists between the words of us Ukrainians and people who come to us from the West, somebody from your own, from among your own, and who say those same things, this only confirms how not only powerful but very truthful the message is, and how very truthful our plea to the West is, that please keep standing with us, because this is important, not only to Ukraine, but also to so many broader things. So that's the idea I would like to leave the audience with.
Yes, 100%. And I think this is what led us to make this podcast. It's not about the voices of two Ukrainians here. It's the voices of people that come to Ukraine to fight for whatever we fight right now. So yes. And once again, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for subscribing. Thank you so much for sharing this podcast with others. The more people are going to listen to it, the more people will know what's really happening in Ukraine right now, and will get inspired by stories like Alex's story or other guests that we had. Yeah, and stay safe and keep each other safe as well. Thank you for
Slava
listening.
Ukraini.
Heroям слава.
Herra,